Alright, so what we're working on is getting a Qvidium standard definition encoder to talk to a receiver. In this case it's an Amino, but it could be another Qvidium encoder box. So the first thing we need to do is plug in all of our connections. Right now we have a very standard definition video camera that's plugged into the inputs of the Qvidium encoder. So there's a RCA video in connector, and then there's also a mini 1/8 inch connector that's being changed from like RCA cables, all coming from the camera. We then have the Qvidium plugged into a network connection, and then the Amino, being the receiving component, is plugged into that same network connection. The third component plugged into the router here is my laptop, which is not necessary to send video between. It's just used for configuration purposes. In the Amino, we have it plugged into this large television right there, and the television is receiving it via composite video out and audio, regular standard audio out. The other connection into the Amino, aside from power, is a keyboard. Again, not necessary for standard operation. We're just going to use it for configuration of the Amino box. Over here on my browser, on my computer, I am on the same network as these two devices, and I've put in the address of both my Qvidium encoder and my Amino. So the address in this case is 192.168.2.200. It couldn't be anything as long as they're able to talk to one another. In this, the first thing we want to do is make sure that the network is set up correctly. So we'll come in here and go to LAN 1. One of the neat things is that the Qvidium has two different LAN ports, and they can be used to be bound together. By binding network connections, you can allow the network bandwidth to be shared. So if you have two slower connections, they can be bound together to make one faster connection. In our case, we're on a local area network, so that's not an issue. I've configured the Qvidium with a static IP address. Typically, if you're out in the field, you'll want to configure this with DHCP. And by using DHCP, you'll just pick up the address of whatever network you're on. Same thing with where we obtain the DNS server information from. In this case, we're not using DNS at all, but I use the router address of 192.168.2.1. Once those are configured, I come in here to the encoder number 1, and I hit Profile. In terms of how I have this configured, I have the video input set to composite. It can be S-video or composite because this is a standard definition device. If it was a high definition device, you'd have other ins like HDMI. Video bit rate is set to 2 megabits per second. The video encoding is set to H.264. We can use MPEG-2, but in our case we want to use H.264. Audio bit rate set to 160 kilobits per second, and that's MPEG-1 layer 2. And the audio sampling rate is 48K. In terms of network transport, the most important thing here we want to use is ARQ, which is a Qvidium protocol that works in conjunction with UDP. And what it allows you to do is have the receiving device send back packets when it's missing one of its UDP packets in a row, and allows for automatic retry queuing or request queuing. And then the next thing we want to do is set the destination IP address. So in our case, we are sending to a fixed IP address of our receiver. And thus, I put in the receiver's address as just 192.168.2.130. The UDP port that we are sending to is set to be 10,030. It can be set to any UDP port, doesn't really matter. The default the Qvidium recommends is 10,030. And then the ARQ port is what will expect to receive packets back from the Amino or any other receiving device that speaks ARQ. Those packets are going to be coming back in on port 7023. Again, the default. Okay. That being the case, there's an advanced tab here with a whole bunch of other options. Low delay set to yes makes sense for faster connections. And what that'll do is make it a more aggressive encoding. 2 audio channels, video filtering is on, video frame rate is full, video resolution is full, video aspect ratio is 4:3, not 16:9. MPEG 4 profile is auto, all the rest is set to auto. I wouldn't worry about any of the output stuff necessarily. The defaults are usually completely fine. And then in terms of the network bonding, you generally want that off. We're not going to use 2 together, but in some cases you would need that. The percentage that you want to allocate to LAN 1 versus LAN 2 in the bonding situation where maybe you don't have the same sort of internet connection. So, how much do you want to send out LAN port 1 or how much you want to send out LAN port 2? And then there's the ARQ buffers. We have it set to 1024, which is the most aggressive. It can be 2048 or 4096. In a fast network situation, 1024 is great. Once you configure that, then you just have to hit the start button. And what that will do is start sending video as soon as the Qvidium detects a video signal. If it does not detect a video signal, it will not send anything. In fact, there's a light right on the front of the Qvidium, this VID, that it basically stands for video, detecting a video signal. If I were to unplug the video signal from the back, that light would go dim, the signal would not be sent. Coming back to the laptop, we next want to look at the Qvidium, or sorry, at the Amino. And one of the things you'll notice is there is no network configuration here in the in the web page. To configure the network for the Amino, this is where we need the trusty keyboard. What you want to do is hit Alt-M and make sure you use the left Alt on the keyboard. And by doing so, you'll be presented with a dialog that asks for a management password. The default management password is leaves, L-E-A-V-E-S. You hit that, and you're presented with this set-top box management screen. When we come down to network configuration, you will see that it is set currently to not use DHCP. However, it is set to use auto-detecting of the Ethernet type, which is completely fine. And it is set with an IP address of 192.168.2.130. Again, looking at the same gateway address of 192.168.2.1. DNS, again, is not going to matter in this case, but 192.168.2.1. Subnet mask is also set the same as on the other devices, 255, 255, 255.0. If you want the Amino or any receiving device to roam, then you would set it to use DHCP, and it would just obtain any address. It doesn't matter. Going back, after this is set, I'm going to go back to the main menu. It's important to set the channel that you are going to be receiving the video signal on, but we'll come back to that in a moment. So let's focus back on the Qvidium screen of the Amino. So this is what's really interesting. The Amino is running Qvidium software. It has a special image loaded on it. It has a Qvidium proxy server. The purpose of this proxy server is to take the signal, to receive the signal from the Qvidium encoder and decode it and then re-encode it, or transcode it if you will, into a signal that the Amino hardware itself can receive. That's where I was alluding to with the channels. So what you'll see here is by default this proxy server will receive video or will receive a signal from anywhere. you'll see that the source port we have configured is 10,030. That was the report that we set the Qvidium encoder to send on. And then we set the destination for the proxy server. So the destination is set to 127.0.0.1, in other words, localhost. It's also set to port 1234, and that'll be important in a moment. So essentially what's happening is this proxy server image internal to the Amino is receiving a UDP stream on port 10,030, and it's sending it out locally on port 1234. If you wanted to configure this to pull a signal from a fixed IP address, then what you would do is use a server and put in the specific server address. In our case, we're going to be receiving a signal from a sender, so we want the server disabled. But if you, say, had a fixed source and wanted to be able to receive that from any random location, then you would use the server mode and you would configure that, that server address. What that will do is it will send a packet to the server at this address, asking it to start sending a video stream to wherever the Amino is. So after we get this configured and hit start, what's going to happen is the proxy server will start receiving and sending at the same time to port 127 or to destination address 127.0.0.1 localhost on port 1234. Looking back to the set-top box management, this is the Amino's configuration system. I'm going to go to channels, and then I'm going to go to just edit channel range, and the default is 1 to 10. Doesn't matter. I'm going to go up to channel 0, and I'm going to type in UDP : basically like a URL, 127.0.0.1:1234. And that is the localhost and port that I'm going to be receiving on, and the protocol is UDP. UDP is what we set this to the proxy server to use. As soon as I do that and I save the changes, I'm going to come back. I'm going to go back to channels, back to the main menu, and then exit the management. You will see that we're actually able to receive the signal from the camera that we have here, which is the source signal, and notice we're receiving that signal with a slight delay. I move the camera, it takes about 3 to 4 seconds on a local LAN of delay. What that delay is the Qvidium taking its source signal, encoding it into an H.264 standard definition stream, sending it across the network, which introduces further latency. The Amino taking that, receiving that signal in the proxy server that's internal to it, transcoding it into, I believe it's an MPEG-2 stream that is then sent locally to a to channel 0, which is what's being picked up by the Amino and displayed on the television. Thank you very much.